Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into one of the most disturbing and unsettling stories you will ever hear, please do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. Seriously, it helps more than you know, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Alright, settle in. This is the story of a woman who vanished without a trace, and when she was found 4 years later, the first X-ray of her body made doctors run out of the room in pure horror. It was just past 3 in the morning on June 26, 2018. Highway 26 cuts through the dense, dark forests of Oregon. A truck driver was heading toward Portland, his headlights cutting through the cold night air. The temperature had dropped to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. He was tired, his eyes heavy. Then, out of nowhere, he saw something that made him slam on his brakes. At the very edge of the roadside, a figure was swaying slowly. It was a woman, but she looked like something that had crawled out of a nightmare. Her clothes had turned into dirty rags that barely clung to her emaciated body. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost transparent, with a network of blue veins clearly visible beneath the surface. Her hair was so thin and dull that it looked as if she had not seen sunlight for years. The driver later told police that at first he thought he was hallucinating from exhaustion. He honked his horn. He flashed his spotlights. But the woman did not react at all. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes staring into nothing. When he got out of his truck and approached her, he noticed that her pupils were maximally dilated. They did not react to the light. She did not speak. She did not blink. She just stood there, like a ghost made of flesh and bone. Police arrived at 4:10 in the morning. They ran a portable fingerprint scan on the spot. What came back made every officer's blood run cold. The fingerprints belonged to Linda Johnson, 26 years old. She had disappeared without a single material trace exactly 4 years earlier, on June 15, 2014. For years, a young woman had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Her car was found parked perfectly at a remote lookout near the Lolo Pass Trail in Mount Hood National Forest. The doors were locked. Her wallet, credit cards, cash, and even her cell phone were still inside on the passenger seat. The only strange things were a faint smell of oil inside the closed vehicle, the kind of smell associated with heavy machinery or a professional garage, and the fact that the driver's seat was pushed all the way back. For a woman who was only 5 feet 4 inches tall, that position would have made it impossible to reach the pedals. Someone else had been driving her car, someone much taller. But back in 2014, the search teams had combed through the forest for 72 hours. They deployed more than 30 volunteers, canine units, and helicopters with thermal imaging. Nothing. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No torn clothing. The forest was abnormally quiet. The search dogs lost the trail multiple times within 100 yards of the parking lot. It was as if Linda Johnson had simply ceased to exist the moment she stepped out of her car. The case was eventually classified as a disappearance under unclear circumstances. The active search was terminated at the end of July 2014. Linda's name slowly faded from the news, but her parents never gave up. Her mother developed uncontrollable hand tremors from the constant stress. Her father drove to the forest every night, circling the area for hours, peering into the darkness, hoping to see his daughter's silhouette in his headlights. Now, on that cold June morning in 2018, she was back. But she was not the same Linda. The police rushed her to Portland General Hospital. She arrived at 5:40 in the morning. The sterile environment of the emergency room, with its cold fluorescent lights and sharp smell of antiseptics, became the setting for her first medical examination. The staff immediately noticed something terribly wrong. Linda did not say a single word. Her eyes were fixed on an empty point in the distance. Her pupils remained fully dilated and barely reacted to a bright medical flashlight. When a nurse gently touched her forearm, Linda's entire body convulsed violently. She shuddered as if she was expecting a powerful electric shock every second. Every physical contact triggered a sharp, involuntary tremor. It was as if her nervous system had been rewired to perceive touch as an attack. Then her parents arrived. After 4 years of mourning, of waiting, of not giving up hope, they finally saw their daughter. They called her name. They ran toward her. But Linda looked right through them. She showed no recognition, no emotion, no flicker of memory. Her face was a fixed, frozen mask. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her mother, whose hand tremors had worsened again, suffered an acute panic attack and had to leave the room after only 10 minutes. It was not a reunion. It was a heartbreak. But the true horror began at 8:20 in the morning in the radiology diagnostics room. Because Linda could not explain her physical condition, she could not speak at all. And because her body was covered in numerous scars, the doctors decided to perform a full X-ray scan of her chest and limbs. They wanted to understand what had happened to her. What they saw on the monitor made them run out of the room. One of the doctors later told Detective Miller that he was physically sickened by what appeared on the screen. One intern, who was standing at the control panel, said the staff literally fled the room as soon as the first images loaded. The X-rays showed a picture that contradicted all known norms of human anatomy and medical ethics. Inside the body of 26-year-old Linda Johnson, there were multiple foreign metal objects. But these were not medical pins or prostheses used in modern surgery. The images revealed crudely made, homemade metal fasteners located along her rib arches. These devices appeared to be pulling her bone skeleton into a specific, unnatural position. The metal objects had perfectly smooth geometric contours that contrasted sharply with the organic tissue of her lungs and muscles. This was not a treatment. This was not an attempt to heal an injury. In the words of the radiologist, it was pure mechanics applied to a living person. The objects had been implanted so precisely that they had become an integral part of her musculoskeletal system, effectively transforming her biological structure into part of an unknown machine. But the most mysterious and frightening object was a small electronic transmitter, surgically implanted right next to her right collarbone. The metal was dense. The soldering was precise. This was not the work of a back-alley butcher. This was the work of someone with advanced technical skills, someone who had access to machining equipment and understood how to integrate metal into living flesh. Detective Miller, who arrived at the hospital at 10 o'clock, wrote in his notebook that the disappearance case had just grown into something much larger and far more dangerous. Linda Johnson had returned from the void, but she no longer belonged to herself. Her body had been turned into a complex mechanism, and her silence only increased the tension in the hospital corridors. The question of where she had been for 4 years, and who had the technical skills and the absolute lack of humanity to perform such manipulations, remained wide open. The Oregon police realized that what they were seeing on the X-ray films was just the tip of a nightmare iceberg. The investigation now began in earnest. Detective Miller launched a large-scale operation to retrace Linda Johnson's route. The first priority was to determine the exact location where she had been held captive for the past 4 years. Based on the point on Highway 26 where the truck driver had found her, the operatives assumed that the place of captivity was located within a 5 to 7 mile radius. The initial theory was that the kidnapper was holding Linda in one of the many abandoned hunting lodges or farms that the dense wooded area near the town of Sandy, Oregon. Over the first 2 weeks of July 2018, police raided 12 suspicious buildings. They checked basements, hidden cellars, and outbuildings. Each visit ended with the same disappointing report. The buildings were empty, covered in years of dust and mold. None of the locations showed signs of recent activity or the technical equipment necessary to carry out the complex manipulations seen in Linda's X-rays. The investigation was stalled, losing precious time in the thick forest that reliably hid its secrets. Then, in early August 2018, came the first significant clue. The sheriff's department received an anonymous call about a 42-year-old resident of a neighboring county. This man had previously been prosecuted for stalking women. A witness claimed to have seen him in the Mount Hood area in June 2014, around the time Linda disappeared. Detective Miller obtained a search warrant. His team searched the man's private residence. In the garage, hidden under a workbench, they found a cardboard box containing women's underwear, a silver chain, and a pair of earrings. Miller wrote in his work diary that they had probably found what they were looking for. But the hope was short-lived. An urgent DNA test came back on August 10, 2018. The results were a demoralizing blow. The biological traces on the seized items had nothing to do with Linda Johnson. They belonged to other victims, but victims of petty thefts committed by this man years earlier. No direct or indirect connection between the 42-year-old suspect and Linda's abduction was ever established. Miller later admitted that following this lead was one of his biggest tactical mistakes. Cost them 3 weeks of intensive work. The investigation was once again at a dead end. While the detectives were stumbling through false leads, the analytical team focused on the nature of the victim's injuries. Seeing those metal inserts on the X-rays, the investigators made a seemingly logical conclusion. The kidnapper must have deep knowledge of surgery or anatomy. The main theory became that the perpetrator was a former doctor, a surgeon, or perhaps a veterinarian who had lost his license or suffered from severe mental disabilities. The Oregon police sent requests to the state's medical associations and veterinary clinics, demanding lists of all specialists who had been dismissed in the last 10 years for professional negligence or aggressive behavior. The checking of hundreds of names lasted all through September 2018. It yielded no results. None of the doctors checked had an alibi that raised doubts, nor the technical equipment necessary to create such metal constructions. The trail went cold. Meanwhile, Linda Johnson herself remained in a state of deep psychological numbness in a secure ward at the Portland clinic. According to the psychiatrist's observation report from September 15, 2018, the patient continued to maintain total silence. She did not respond to any questions about her place of detention or the identity of her captor. But the staff noticed one strange and methodical action that she repeated every day. Linda would lie motionless for hours. Then, sometimes, she would begin to slowly draw on the white bed sheet with her index finger. When a nurse came closer, she saw that Linda was not drawing words or symbols of help. She was drawing complex geometric patterns. These drawings resembled gears and pinions that meshed together. They were made with incredible precision for a person in such a condition. Every line was straight. The proportions of the circles seemed verified to the millimeter. According to the medical staff, it looked as if her mind had been completely replaced by mechanical images. Linda did not draw her parents' faces. She did not draw the scenery of the forest where she was found. She was reproducing the movement of mechanisms that had apparently become the only reality of her life for the past 4 years. Detective Miller, familiarizing himself with these observations in late September, began to doubt the medical origin of the perpetrator. He noticed that the diagrams on the sheet looked more like engineering sketches than anatomical atlases. This realization was the first step in changing the entire vector of the investigation. But at the time, the police were still too far from the truth, wasting resources on checking people who had nothing to do with the metal that was slowly growing into Linda Johnson's body. The tension in the headquarters was growing. Every day of the victim's silence and the investigation's failure gave the kidnapper a chance to disappear forever. Then, on October 4, 2018, the Linda Johnson investigation took a sharp turn. This turn finally led the detectives out of hospital operating rooms and into the world of industrial zones, private workshops, and precision machining. While Miller's core team continued to check medical license archives, one of the leading forensic scientists at the Oregon State Crime Lab, a man named Arthur Weiss, drew attention to an inconsistency. After analyzing high-resolution digital copies of the X-rays, he noticed that the metal objects in the girl's body had a specific surface texture that was completely uncharacteristic of medical titanium or surgical steel. According to the official conclusion of the technical examination on October 10, 2018, the foreign objects were not serial medical devices at all. Analysis of the metal density using computed tomography showed that the fasteners on Linda's ribs were made of high-strength, aircraft-grade 6061 aluminum, and some of the pins were made of hardened chromium molybdenum steel. Weiss's report noted that these materials are the standard in aircraft construction and professional sports car tuning, because they combine extreme lightness with extreme mechanical resistance. No hospital in Oregon or neighboring Washington had ever ordered such alloys for surgery. Then came the most significant discovery. During macrophotography of one fragment that could be partially examined through a damaged area of the victim's skin, forensic scientists noticed microscopic markings. These were barely visible concentric notches, the kind left by the cutter of a professional CNC lathe. The nature of these lines indicated that the part was not made on a factory assembly line. It was made in a high-precision private workshop where equipment had been customized to individual, extremely complex parameters. This discovery completely changed the psychological profile of the criminal. Detective Miller wrote in the minutes of the meeting on October 15, 2018 that they were no longer looking for a sadistic surgeon. The new object of the search was a person who was used to working with cold metal, grease, and complex circuits. According to the investigation, the kidnapper perceived the human body not as a living organism, but as a complex unit, a chassis that needed to be modernized and strengthened. This explained the perfect symmetry of the structures installed and their technical perfection, which bordered on mania. On October 16, 2018, the police began a large-scale inspection of all private workshops, metalwork shops, and tuning studios within a 50-mile radius of Portland. The list of potential locations included more than 80 facilities. The detectives were looking for locations that had specific equipment, such as the latest generation of CNC machines capable of working with aircraft alloys. Officers who participated in the raids later reported that the owners of most workshops reacted with disbelief. They said that such precision requires years of training and costs tens of thousands of dollars. According to one engineer interviewed as an expert on October 20th, the person who made these items must have had a top-order engineering mind. Integrating metal into living tissue with such mathematical precision required not only knowledge of the resistance of materials, but also specific equipment capable of machining parts with an error of less than 1/1000th of an inch. As the checks progressed, the detectives had an increasingly clear sense that they were looking for an invisible master craftsman, a man whose obsession with order and precision went far beyond reason. The work was exhausting. Each facility required a detailed check of metal purchase documents and machine tool maintenance logs. By the end of October 2018, the investigation team had already processed 32 workshops. None of them aroused serious suspicion. The lists of business owners were carefully checked against offender databases, but there were no matches. The trail of the invisible craftsman seemed cold as the metal itself inside Linda Johnson's body. On October 28, 2018, the investigative team led by Detective Miller was forced to admit that a direct search through modern workshop databases had not yielded the expected results. An inspection of over 50 properties within a 50-mile radius of Portland confirmed that many owners had the necessary equipment, but none had criminal records or any connection to the Johnson family. Realizing that the roots of the crime might lie in events that occurred 4 years earlier, Miller decided to fully review the materials of the initial investigation from 2014. He suggested that a clue once considered insignificant might now, in light of new knowledge about the hijacker's technical obsession, be the key. On October 30, 2018, at 10:30 in the morning, Detective Miller arrived at the Oregon State Police's temporary evidence storage facility. There, under a dense layer of gray dust, sat Linda Johnson's car, the dark blue sedan that had been found at the Lolo Pass overlook back in June 2014. According to the inspection report at the time, the vehicle was in good working order. But investigators had focused on finding biological traces inside the cabin, not the mechanical condition of the engine or the underbody. Miller brought in an independent automotive expert with 20 years of experience to conduct a full inspection. The results of this technical examination, recorded in a report dated November 2, 2018, became a sensation. The expert found that a few days before her disappearance, Linda Johnson had carried out extensive maintenance on her car. The water pump had been replaced. The fuel supply system had been professionally tuned. According to the expert, this was not just an ordinary replacement of parts. It was jewelry work, performed using high-strength components that are not usually installed on standard city sedans. The cost of such work and parts was estimated to exceed $1,200. A check of Linda's financial records for June 2014 confirmed this fact. On June 11th, for days before she disappeared, the corresponding amount had been debited from her account in favor of a small private workshop located on the outskirts of Portland's industrial district. According to IRS records, the business was owned by a single individual and was positioned as a precision engine service. Miller immediately went back to the witness interrogation records from 2014. He wanted to find out if the police had ever spoken to the owner of that business. In a report dated June 20, 2014, Miller found a brief summary of an interview with the owner of the workshop. The detectives at the time had interviewed him as just one of many witnesses who had seen Linda in the days before she left for Mount Hood. The man confirmed that she was picking up her car after repairs. He also provided an alibi for the day she disappeared. According to his statement, he had been working continuously for 36 hours on a complex order for an aircraft factory without leaving his garage. He claimed this could be confirmed by the records of the electricity consumption of his machines. But when Miller reread the testimony 4 years later, he noticed a detail that had previously seemed like a simple display of attentiveness. In his testimony from 2014, the owner of the workshop had described Linda Johnson with incredible, almost photographic accuracy. He did not just note her presence. He noted that she was wearing a light blue silk blouse with mother-of-pearl buttons, a thin gold ring on her left ring finger, and light jeans with a slight scuff on the knees. For a mechanic who sees dozens of customers every day and focuses his mind on metal parts, this level of detail seemed deeply abnormal. According to a forensic psychologist whom Miller consulted on November 5, 2018, such selective memory often indicates a person's objectification of another human being. A person with a manic mindset remembers the smallest details of the object of his obsession as meticulously as he remembers the parameters of a complex mechanism. This was the first serious inconsistency in the behavior of a witness who had remained beyond suspicion for 4 long years. The investigation also found that the forest where Linda had planned her hike was located within a 10-mile radius of this man's workshop. Miller began to study the owner's identity in more detail without making direct contact, so as not to scare off a potential suspect. It turned out that the alibi of the complex aircraft order had never been thoroughly checked. The data on electricity consumption did indeed indicate the operation of powerful equipment, but no one could confirm that the owner was physically in the workshop at the time, rather than simply using the machine's automated cycle while he was elsewhere. What had been perceived as a sign of hard work in 2014 now looked like a perfectly designed technical screen. According to a sheriff's deputy who participated in the initial search, Linda's car had been found with the driver's seat in a position that was comfortable for a man of much taller stature, not for a woman of her height. Miller began to combine these facts: the expensive work on the engine, the craftsman's abnormal memory for the details of the girl's appearance, and the technical ability to create complex metal structures. Every page of the old archive now breathed the cold of metal. The investigation came very close to finding the name of a man whose passion for mechanical perfection could go far beyond metalwork. That name was first mentioned in Miller's office at 6 o'clock in the evening on November 7, 2018. It marked the point of no return in the case. The man was Mark Wright. He was the owner of Wright's Precision Motors, a small but highly specialized engineering workshop. Now, the detectives had to find out what exactly was hiding behind the facade of exemplary order in that workshop, the last place where the real Linda Johnson had been seen alive, 4 years ago. On November 8, 2018, at 9 in the morning, the investigation team officially entered the name of the main suspect into the case report. After comparing the technical characteristics of the metal parts found inside Linda Johnson's body with the archived receipts for repairs to her car, Detective Miller obtained a warrant to investigate the owner of Wright's Precision Motors. Mark Wright was 34 years old. He was a precision engineering specialist with an impeccable reputation among owners of expensive sports cars. But to social services and the police, he remained an absolute mystery. According to the report on the operational surveillance that began on November 10, 2018, Mark Wright's life resembled the work of a perfectly calibrated clockwork. During 72 hours of surveillance, detectives recorded that the man had almost no social contacts. He did not visit bars. He did not meet friends. He did not use social networks. His day started at exactly 6:45 in the morning and ended late at night, in the box of his workshop, where the lights stayed on until 2 in the morning. Operatives in a covert surveillance vehicle, parked 300 yards from the site, noted in their reports that Wright seemed to exist in another time dimension, a dimension where there was no room for human weakness or chance. On November 11, 2018, under the guise of a fire safety inspection, Detective Miller crossed the threshold of Wright's workshop for the first time. What he saw inside caused the experienced investigator a deep sense of disturbance, a feeling he later described in a detailed memo. The 3,000-square-foot room was almost manic in its orderliness. It looked more like an operating room than a car repair shop. Every tool, from massive hydraulic wrenches to the tiniest drill bits, only a few microns in diameter, was laid out strictly by size, purpose, and weight. There was not a single speck of grease or dust on the metal racks. Mark Wright was literally obsessed with the correctness of the arrangement of things. He did not allow even a millimeter of deviation from the ideal lines he had set for himself. According to Miller, Wright met him in a perfectly clean gray work uniform. The man spoke in a calm, emotionless voice. His movements were so precise, so calculated, that it seemed as if he had precomputed every trajectory of his body in advance. During the short conversation, he never looked away from the detective's eyes. but his eyes remained as cold as the polished steel of his machine tools. When Miller mentioned Linda Johnson's car, Wright only tilted his head slightly. He confirmed that he remembered that blue sedan, but he remembered it as if he had worked on it only a few hours ago, not 4 years ago. On November 12, 2018, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mark Wright was invited to the police department for a second interview. The minutes of the meeting recorded that the suspect was extremely confident. He reproduced, in detail and without a single stutter, all the technical manipulations he had performed on the water pump and fuel system of Linda's car back in June 2014. He spoke of numbers, tolerances, and alloy names as if he were reading from a textbook. But the atmosphere in the interrogation room changed the moment Detective Miller placed a folder on the table. That folder contained the results of the latest medical examination, the X-rays showing the metal structures inside Linda's body. When Wright saw those images, his reaction was completely unexpected. According to the officer watching from behind the one-way mirror, Wright's pupils instantly dilated, and a strange, almost proud smile appeared on his face. It was not the expression of a man who was afraid or guilty. It was the look of a creator who had finally seen his completed creation after a long separation. He leaned closer to the photographs, examining the details of the fasteners as if he were assessing the quality of a weld or the cleanliness of a surface finish. At this point, Wright made a statement that was captured by the audio recording at 3:20 in the afternoon. He said that he had always taken care of her car better than anyone else. He said that Linda was unique material that required structural reinforcement. He did not deny that he knew her better than a typical mechanic would know a client. His speech became rapid, filled with complex technical terms that he used to justify his actions. He spoke of the human body as an imperfect biological mechanism that needed to be modernized in order to survive in an aggressive environment. It was at this moment that Detective Miller and his colleagues realized the true extent of the danger they were facing. Mark Wright's obsession with mechanics and order had crossed every boundary of human reason and morality. For him, there was no boundary between iron and flesh. For him, Linda Johnson was not a woman, not a person, not a victim. She was the most complex object in his life, a machine that he was trying to bring to technical perfection using his machines and the surgical skills he had acquired through self-education. Despite what amounted to a de facto admission of his participation in altering the girl's anatomy, Wright remained completely calm about the legal consequences. He acted as if his intellectual superiority and technical prowess made him untouchable, beyond the reach of the law. The Oregon police realized they were dealing with a man whose pathology was cemented in the cold calculations and perfect cleanliness of his workshop. At 4:45 in the afternoon, Mark Wright was detained for further investigation. But the main mystery still remained unsolved. Where exactly had he conducted his horrific experiments? Were there other victims, other living machines hidden in the dark corners of his maniacal world? The detectives prepared for a full search of Wright's precision motors, sensing that the sterile floor of that facility held the answers to the questions that had haunted the state of Oregon for the past 4 years. On November 14, 2018, at 9 in the morning, Detective Miller, accompanied by a team of forensic scientists and an engineering specialist, began a second, far more detailed search of the Wright's precision motors facility. Although the workshop looked like a model industrial facility at first glance, Miller could not ignore the anomalous power consumption figures that did not match the schedules of the machine tools. For 6 hours, specialists used ground-penetrating radar to scan the concrete floor for any hidden voids. At 15 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, the device detected a significant deviation. It was located directly under one of the powerful hydraulic lifts designed to service heavy off-road vehicles. According to the search report, a hidden electromagnetic lock was found under the metal base of the lift. This lock was activated through the control terminal of one of the lathes. When the mechanism was triggered, a portion of the concrete floor weighing more than 2 tons slid down smoothly, revealing the entrance to a vertical shaft with a steel staircase. Descending 12 feet below ground level, the officers discovered a sealed bunker. Its area was approximately 350 square feet. The room was decorated with special soundproofing panels of the kind commonly used in civil aviation to dampen engine vibrations. There were no windows. The only source of oxygen was a forced ventilation system that worked almost silently. The artificial lighting in the cell was regulated by an automatic timer, creating a strict cycle of day and night that did not depend on real time on the surface. It was a perfect, sterile, mechanical prison, designed by a mind that saw humans as just another system to be controlled and optimized. The investigation later reconstructed the events of June 15, 2014. Linda Johnson had come to Mark Wright for a final car check before her planned trip to the National Forest. It was at that moment that Wright, who had been watching her for months, decided to turn his obsession into a horrific reality. The case file states that Mark did not perceive Linda as a living being, but as a perfectly designed form that he sought to maintain in perfect condition. For 4 years, he used the bunker as a laboratory. He carried out his technical improvements on the girl. He mounted metal fixtures and sensors into her body. He tried to integrate mechanics into an organic structure, testing the limits of the human skeleton's endurance under stress. But what initially seemed to be his complete control was met with invisible, quiet, fierce resistance. According to the later findings of the psychologists who studied Linda's notes and her drawings from the bunker, she turned her imprisonment into a process of methodical training. When the lights went out at night, Linda would spend hours in complete silence, training her muscles. She performed micro-movements to maintain her motor skills despite the foreign objects implanted in her body. She learned to distinguish the tiniest fluctuations in the air that occurred when the front hatch was opened. She learned to count the seconds it took Mark to turn the key in the lock. She memorized the rhythm of his footsteps, the sound of the hydraulics, and the exact time it took for the airtight door to seal after he left. She was prepared for an escape attempt every single second of her 4-year captivity. She was just waiting for a single technical error by her captor. The fatal mistake for Mark Wright occurred on June 26, 2018, at 2:20 in the morning. According to the suspect's cell phone records, he received a call about an urgent malfunction of the fire extinguishing system in a warehouse he rented in another part of the city. Mark, whose mind demanded that any technical imperfection be fixed immediately, instantly lost concentration. When he left the bunker, he was in such a hurry that he only imitated the usual turn of the key in the massive lock. He did not make sure that the bolt was fully seated in the groove. The door closed, but it did not lock. Linda, who was on the other side of the room, instantly reacted to this subtle, atypical sound of metal hitting metal. It was the sound she had been waiting for thousands of days. As soon as Wright's footsteps faded away and the hum of the elevator above died down, she rushed to the door. Thanks to months of covert training, she was able to overcome the pain from her implants and push open the massive door. It was held shut only by friction now. She slipped out of the workshop just a few minutes before Mark Wright drove off the property in his pickup truck. For a man whose entire life was built on the foundation of perfect order and the absolute absence of accidents, this single mistake, combined with the victim's unbreakable will, was the point of complete collapse. When detectives examined the cell, they found hundreds of small scratches on the wall under the soundproofing panels. Linda had used those scratches to keep her own precise countdown. This steel prison, considered by Wright to be the pinnacle of his engineering, had become a place where the human spirit proved stronger than aircraft aluminum. The search lasted late into the night. Each new discovery in the bunker only confirmed that the police were dealing with a monster who had tried to rewrite the laws of nature using his machines. But the answer to the question of how Linda Johnson would live on with that metal inside her was not written in any of Mark Wright's technical manuals. On January 14, 2019, the Portland District Court began a trial that went down in Oregon's criminal history as the mechanical torture case. The proceedings were held in an atmosphere of unprecedented public tension. The courtroom was crowded with journalists and technical experts, all trying to understand the motives of a man whose engineering skills had become a tool of violence. According to court records, Mark Wright appeared in a perfectly pressed suit, maintaining the same icy calm that detectives had observed during his arrest in the workshop. Linda Johnson was unable to attend the hearings in person. Her psychological state, according to doctors, was incompatible with direct visual contact with the accused. Her testimony was read aloud by the prosecutor in the form of written statements that had been collected over months of rehabilitation. Those texts left everyone in the room breathless. They described 4 years of living in absolute isolation and forced anatomical changes. Yet the most shocking moment of the trial was Wright's own defense. He refused the services of government lawyers and insisted on managing his own strategy. He argued that his actions were not torture. According to court audio recordings from January 20, 2019, Wright claimed that he had not been torturing Linda. he had been modernizing her. He called himself a visionary who was trying to eliminate the structural deficiencies of the human skeleton by replacing fragile biological joints with wear-resistant aircraft alloys. He spoke of Linda as his most successful project. He expressed regret only that he had not had time to complete the full cycle of testing on his equipment. Such a blatant lack of remorse, and the perception of another human being as nothing more than raw material, became decisive for the jury. On January 28, 2019, Mark Wright was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting in his verdict that Wright's danger lies in his ability to rationalize horror through cold technical logic. Linda Johnson returned to her parents' home, but her life had been shattered into pieces that could never be fully glued back together. The process of removing the metal objects from her body lasted several months and required a series of complex, high-risk surgeries. The surgeons at Portland Clinic were able to remove the homemade attachments and the transmitter, but they could not remove the memory that her own body had been turned into a machine. Every millimeter of her skin where the steel had once been remained covered in deep scars. Her muscles continued to convulse at the slightest reminder of her captivity, according to medical reports. The most devastating consequence of the enhancement was a total phobia of metal. There was no longer a single object made of stainless steel, aluminum, or copper in Linda's home. According to her mother, Linda could not even bear the sound of forks clashing together in the kitchen drawer. That clanging triggered instant seizures and panic attacks that could last for hours. The whole family switched to using only plastic utensils and appliances. Silence reigned in the house, broken only by the dull, soft sound of plastic. Any metallic echo sent Linda back to the sealed bunker under the hydraulic lift. Her parents, who had fought for her return for 4 years, now lived in an atmosphere of constant fear for their daughter's mental health. They watched as the once cheerful, ambitious young woman turned into a shadow of herself. According to her father, the most painful thing was watching her daily routine. Linda, who had escaped thanks to one unlocked lock, was now a prisoner of her own security checks. Every night before going to bed, she walked around all the doors and windows dozens of times. She pulled the handles and checked the mechanisms over and over. She counted the seconds it took for the deadbolt to activate, trying to make absolutely sure that the door was locked for good. This manic need for control was the only way she could feel that the metal was now working for her, not against her. The fate of Wright's precision motors was decided quickly. By court order, the property was confiscated, and the equipment was sold off to pay compensation to the Johnson family. However, the building remained empty for a long time. None of the local residents wanted to rent a place where a chamber of horror had been hidden under the concrete floor. The last scene of this tragedy was captured in the photographs of the bailiffs who conducted the final inventory of the building. On the gray concrete floor of the empty workshop, where Wright's desk had once stood, there was still a clear trace of white chalk. It was the same area where Linda, with no other tools available to her, had marked the days of her captivity. Each line had been carved with such force that the chalk had been pressed deep into the pores of the concrete. It left an eternal inscription about the indomitable human spirit in the face of mechanical madness. The Linda Johnson case changed the regulations for inspections of private workshops in Oregon. But it could not change the unthinkable reality that a 26-year-old woman would forever be linked to her captor by invisible chains of trauma. Her story ends with an image of that empty workshop. In the silence, no longer broken by the roar of machinery, the chalk marks on the floor are the only evidence of the 4 years that were stolen from her in the name of technical perfection. Linda Johnson survived, but her body and her soul will forever carry the coldness of the steel that once tried to become part of her. Thank you for listening to this story. If you made it to the end, you are the kind of person who seeks the truth no matter how dark. Please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And subscribe if you haven't already. There are many more stories waiting for you. Stay safe and remember, sometimes the most dangerous places are not the dark forests, but the shining, orderly workshops where the lights never turn off.